Have you kind of noticed that people are just scared of bread these days? Yes, scared. There is a fear of bread. Many people believe that they just can never have bread again, that it's bad for them, it is evil, depending on who you talk to. And this is even true in Christian circles, despite the fact that Jesus specifically called himself the bread of life. And frankly, this is just a type of bondage that, especially as Christians, we should not be given to bondage. And in this video, we're going to be talking about this, kind of diving into this topic, as well as sharing some amazing testimonies with y'all. Hey y'all, welcome back to Grains and Grit. My name is Felicia, and on this channel, we talk all things real whole grains from a biblical perspective. So like I said in this video, I'm going to be addressing the fear that people have when it comes to bread. And I already know that people are going to say, well, I'm not scared of bread. Like, you think that it's going to jump out from the closet and bite you or something. But I would ask yourself these important questions. Do you believe that bread makes you fat? Do you dare not touch bread because gluten is bad? Do you not touch bread because you believe that grains are toxic, whether it's toxic now or they have always been toxic? Do you believe that we were never meant to digest grains? And I could go on. So if any of these answers are yes, then you are most likely experiencing some sort of fear or anxiety when it comes to bread. And my friends, I'm here to tell you that this is a type of bondage that God never intended for you to have. Now, to be honest, this video is mainly geared towards Christians because the Bible is my foundation, and that is my foundation for everything. But even if you're not a Christian, I do want to tell you to still listen up. This video still is relevant to you because there are some truths about bread that most people, I would say, do not know about. And I really want you to understand these truths no matter what your beliefs are. Now, in case you're new to this channel, whenever I say that we talk about all things real whole grains, I mean it. I reject the fake bread and the fake flour from the store. I believe that that's something that pretty much we can all agree on is bad for you. But what I'm talking about is real bread that most likely you have never had in your life. And I want you to think about this, the fact that you have probably never had real bread ever in your life. I'm also going to share some amazing testimonies that I've received, just some of the many that I've received that clearly show people being free from this bondage of rejecting bread and grains in their diet. Now, first, I'm just going to say, because I'm already going to get the comments, I already hear them in my brain. I totally get that there are people out there that don't touch bread because it makes you feel like garbage. The fear to consume any gluten is legitimate because you do not feel good whenever you eat bread. It makes you sick. You have digestion issues, all the things that are just yucky. I totally understand you wanting to stay away from something that clearly makes you feel like garbage. But I'm also here to share good news with you. Most likely, it's not the gluten that is the issue. The issue, like I said earlier, is that you probably just never consumed real bread the way God intended in your life. And that is so much of the problem these days, is that most people just consume fake bread, fake flour, and then they get health issues from it. So because of their health issues, they then say that all bread is bad and we just need to avoid it completely. Now, there are two huge red flags when it comes to this argument, especially if you are a Bible-believing Christian. Listen up. Red flag number one, you really need to ask yourself is, why did Jesus call himself the bread of life if bread is so toxic? Why is bread so bad for you? Does that mean that Jesus is bad for you? Red flag number two is, does living this gluten-free lifestyle, rejecting bread, does it feel isolating? Do you feel isolated from others, always having to check to see, does this have gluten in it? Does this have bread? And maybe not being able to participate in meals with your fellow believers. Specifically, the Lord's Supper. Think about it. What is the Lord's Supper? It is bread and wine. So a huge red flag. Why would the Lord's Supper be something that is so toxic for us? Do you ever wonder about this? Have you asked yourself this? And I receive testimonies from people who say, this is what I was wondering. And like, why is bread so bad for me? If Jesus said he's the bread of life, if the Lord's Supper contains bread, what is going on? The big thing is that it is a flour. It is not the wheat. Now I'm going to beat this dead horse all day long. The wheat is not the problem. It is the flour that is the problem. Modern flour today, if you're consuming white flour, if you're buying flour from the store, you're buying bread from the store, 99% chance that it has been made with fake flour where the germ and the bran has been removed. And then on top of that, bread from the store usually has extra gluten added back into it. So basically, you're consuming nothing but gluten and starch plus extra gluten. Let that sink into your brain. So our bread has been stripped of the fiber and the nutrients that God put in place in grains to help you digest them. No wonder you're having issues. Real bread comes from the entire wheat berry, because then in that entire wheat berry, that is the seed of the wheat plant, and in there contains all the nutrients that are needed to help you digest it, including that fiber. In fact, it contains all essential nutrients that we need. It's just slightly deficient in 4 of them. So many Christians have basically run back to Egypt. They have rejected the manna that God has given us, the bread that he has given us, and they are choosing to go back into bondage. Now, this may be because you actually have real health issues, or you've been convinced that bread is the evil of all evils. Now, again, clarifying point that I'm going to make yet again, I totally get that there are allergies, that there are real health issues out there. I'm not a medical professional. This is not medical advice. And if that is you, I'm not saying that it is wrong for you to reject foods that are making you sick. That is a duh. Or, if you have allergies, they will kill you. Obviously, I'm not talking about that. But my point is that sometimes your health issues are caused by lifestyle choices. They are caused by possibly rejecting the food that God has given you. This is some tough love from mama here. And possibly you have rejected the food that God has given you, and now you're sick. You have rejected the bread that he provided for you. And this may be because you fully know that you're rejecting it, or maybe you just did not know. Trust me, I didn't know either until I was in my mid-20s, and I'd eaten bread all my life, or what I thought was bread. Just know, if you're drinking a 12-pack of sodas every day, if you're eating nothing but processed foods, I assure you, that is not real food. You're going to have health issues because of that. If you want to know how you ended up with diabetes, but all you've been eating is processed food and lots of sugar and all of that junk, yeah, I would say that's a lifestyle choice. So again, I'm not talking about your real allergies, but I am talking to you. If you have possibly made a decision to not eat the food that God has created to be food, again, maybe out of ignorance because you just didn't know, you just don't know any better, or because you actually know and you chose not to. I ask you to just be open to God's real foods. Get rid of the junk and embrace his ways, because that, my friends, may actually bring you healing. Now, disclaimer aside, the other thing that this is doing with rejecting God's food, and especially his bread, is this is actually causing division in our churches. I don't know if you've been somewhere with fellow Christians and having these conversations, and then diet comes up. And there is so much controversy with what we eat. There is something wrong if you cannot come together with friends, with family, especially with fellow believers, and just share a meal together. Again, it's one thing to have an actual allergy, a health issue, but it's another thing to just reject the food that has been given to you. And this is really what saddens me, is the fact that we are struggling with fellowshipping with others at a table, a meal. Like, that's like the ultimate fellowship, the ultimate time to really get to know people is sharing a meal together. And I actually know a family, they're friends of ours, and they had a fellow professing Christian who would do church together, and they would have a meal. They would want to share a meal afterwards, and this is very common. And then suddenly this other believer really jumped on the bandwagon of raw food, everything, including meat. Like, he honestly said that it was a sin to cook your food. I kid you not, even meat. It is a sin to cook anything. This actually was creating a lot of tension around meal times, because this person would bring their own food. And it's not just bringing their own food. First of all, as a Southerner, like, just rude. But beyond that, it's causing division, because he, on top of just bringing his own food, was actually looking down on them and seeing the other believers as sinful because they were eating food that was cooked. And they tried to accommodate, but heavens, I'm not eating no raw chicken, okay, or raw meat. It just goes too far. And he was actually browbeating them with this. And where we're supposed to be fellowshipping together, so much division and fellowship broken where it was just not enjoyable. You didn't even want to share a meal with him, which was just so tragic, especially in this case, because this one was an obvious one, because even Jesus himself cooked food. I'm just saying. I still don't know where he got that, but that's another story. So I know that that was an extreme example, but the bottom line is do you have people coming to your table and you have prepared a great meal for them, and then they sit down and then they just reject it for whatever reason? Again, allergies aside, which usually I ask, do you have any allergies? And people usually will let you know if they have allergies, and that's understandable. But just think about that. I mean, is it just me where there's just something wrong? It's not right. It's not how God intended it all. Have you seen the meme where it shows Jesus feeding the 5,000, and then people in the crowd were asking, is this bread gluten free? Is this fish vegan? Was it farm raised? And, you know, all of these things. Is this organic? All of these things. And we laugh about that. But in essence, that is what we're doing today. And I get it. It is so confusing because nowadays we have genetically modified foods, we have pesticides, we have all of these things going on. And I totally understand. And then on top of that, everyone thinks like this diet is best and you need to be on this diet. And it is just flat out confusing. But the Bible is actually not confusing on this issue. We should be receiving food with thanksgiving, and let us break bread together. Let us come together as fellow believers and be able to break bread to fellowship with each other. But real bread. Let us share. If you already know about what real bread is, we should be sharing it with others because it is so freeing. The fact that people can now most likely consume bread, and that this is the real bread. This is the bread that Jesus was comparing himself to. And now just light bulbs go off, and you understand it, and it is absolutely amazing. And to prove my point, let us read some testimonies that deals with this very thing. So many people have told me how they have been freed from the bondage of being gluten free, or thinking that they can never have bread again, and the isolation that they feel from their families. So listen up, Buttercup, because I get so excited with these, and I will put them up here on the screen for y'all so you can read them yourself. So first up, we have Marcia, who sent this to me via email, and she writes, I have learned so much. One thing I'm grateful for is your loaf of bread. My dad is diabetic and he loves bread, but gave it up for years until I made your bread and asked him to try it and check his blood sugars. He did multiple times and checked his blood sugar, and this bread does not increase his blood sugar, and he can now eat bread again. What a blessing. And I make it for him 2 loaves at a time. So that is absolutely amazing. I especially get questions from people who are diabetics because they're told to stay away from bread because it spikes their blood sugar. But contrary, white bread, white flour is high on the glycemic index. Stay away from that. But real true whole grains, like the bread that I teach you to make, that is actually very low on the glycemic index and should not have any issues with your sugar. Next up, we have Mama Bird here on YouTube, and she says, I'm 75 and had bad night hives, as in wake me up at 3 a.m., covered in huge hives. Doctors could not pinpoint the cause after several medications tried to no avail. Doctor said, try Allegra, and I did it. It worked, but doctor said probably the rest of my life. Not gonna happen. So I went on research hunt for answers, stumbled upon Sue Becker bread videos, and thought it's worth a shot. Now, first, I'm not a bread eater, period, just never cared for it, but I was desperate, so bought a mill and hard red wheat and emmer wheat made bread. It was so tasty. Did this for 3 weeks, still taking Allegra. Now she's been on Allegra for a year. And she got brave one night and skipped the Allegra and didn't wake up with hives, but thought, well, it's just Allegra built up in my system. So next night, no Allegra, no hives. Hey, maybe this is going to work. Kept up 2 slices of bread a day, so just 2 slices a day, and no hives. One day she forgot to eat bread and woke up with hives coming on, so she's eating bread at 2:30 a.m. and it stopped. This has now been nearly 3 years and not an ounce of weight gain. In fact, I've now lost 12 pounds in that time, not trying, it's just slowly coming off. I'm happy with those side effects. I take no meds at all except for the eye drops for glaucoma, and that's it. I like to keep my doctor in his office. If I need him, he's there, not in my cabinet. I thank God for guiding me to this real live bread of life. And that's amazing. 75 years old and no medication. Next up, we have Greg Johnson here on YouTube. And he says, just going to throw this out there. I have an undergraduate degree in biochemistry with a clinical doctorate. Impressive credentials. My wife had warned me many times about my diet, father is diabetic, etc., despite me not being fat. I finally realized I was a thin glutton. Once I got down on my knees and gave it to the only one and true God, Jesus Christ, I find the bread literally 2 weeks later, talking about this real bread that we mill fresh. After 3 weeks of getting the grain, I noticed a skin tag in my right nostril had disappeared. Gone. Must have been a wart. My toenails are finally starting to become strong. I've gotten so many comments about how I lost weight despite not being fat. I noticed my appetite for meat just naturally diminished. I find my sweet tooth is satisfied from these cookies and muffins with sugar cut at least a third to half the rest of my requirement. Not because the sugar is only needed to enhance the flavor of the wheat, not provide the flavor with sweetness. My child hair growth picked up. My wife lost weight too. My child's skin rash went dormant. It's been a miracle. I felt so silly because it was right there in the Bible this entire time. I have researched galore. We have done vegan, tried keto, Western price, etc. My biggest obstacle was cravings. I could not get past those cravings beyond 2 weeks. Then finally, when I gave up my sin, my quest for food was over. I am free. I gave up my gluttony for food, and then God gave me his food in return. Love that so much. No comments. Just let that speak for itself. Jenny sends this to me on email. I am nearly in tears. I just made your biscuit recipe and they turned out so beautiful. I myself have always been a bread girl, but totally fake flour. Since being married and once having children, I enjoyed making our foods from scratch. Not everything was, but I enjoyed incorporating more whole foods as the year went on. I thought I was doing good making homemade bread with fake white flour and occasionally whole wheat, but that one always tasted terrible. So heavy and dense. I ended up going gluten-free a couple years back thinking it would help my stomach issues. It did, but I missed bread tremendously. I tried sourdough with fake flour, but still felt sick after eating it for a few weeks and was so disappointed. This past spring, I came across that video you did on being gluten-free. I was so excited to try freshly milled bread. Oh, I can't tell you how happy we are to have found that. I started out grinding on my Vitamix to try it. We've been eating this bread every day since May and feel amazing. Just felt it was right to let you know how valuable this information you are sharing truly is. I love now noticing how often the scriptures contain verses about grain and bread. It's so sad the propaganda that's out there on real wheat. I wish every family knew the goodness of this gift God has given us and all children could start their lives with freshly milled flour in their foods. Love that. I received this many times from people who've been gluten-free because, she had health issues. She felt terrible eating bread and so sad for it. But now she can, and almost in tears while just eating a biscuit. Next up, we have the Natural Motive on Instagram. This is an Instagram comment. I am proof of this. This is one I did about how basically this issue where many people have never had real bread in their life. I have been off of gluten for over 12 years now. 12 years. And was struggling over the fact that even though I felt so much better off of it, the gluten-free products out there just really are not that nutritious and have so many fillers. I kept thinking if Jesus called himself the bread of life, how can grains be bad for us? So I started researching milling my own grains. And in November of 2023, I dove in and I have not had a single issue yet eating my own milled flour. So thank you for all your helpful info. Wonderful. And again, not the only one. I can't imagine over a decade not having bread. That's just crazy. But now she is free and she has found real bread that she can have. Last but not least, certainly not least, this is one of my favorite ones that inspired this video. This is from Emily, sent to me again via email. She says, I've been gluten-free for 10 years, but after listening to Sue Becker and many of your videos, I finally mustered the courage to try freshly milled grains. It's only been a little over a week since reintroducing it in my diet, and honestly, I'm a little scared to even talk about it because I might jinx it. But I'm also so excited by not being bothered by my usual symptoms. What put the stick in my bicycle wheel was how both of you repeated that Jesus referred to himself as the bread of life. Why would he refer to something that our culture perceives as evil unless our evil culture has perverted what is truly good? Amen. Park it right there. She says, I got pretty good with gluten-free flours, but there were many things that just weren't quite the same. Plus, after making my family regular wheat things, I often went without because I was too tired to make my own. So isolating, and I didn't even really see it like that. There's importance to breaking bread together. It has been 10 years since I've eaten a real biscuit, and this morning I got to enjoy the real thing with my family. They thought I was losing it by becoming misty-eyed over a biscuit, but it was so much more than that. Thank you for putting informative and encouraging content out. I would not have tried without the information and encouragement. Y'all, it is much more than a biscuit. It really is. She was able to now not feel isolated from her family, that she'd been feeling that way for a decade. Guys, that is bondage. Free yourself from this. Less than 1% of people in the United States are celiacs. Most likely, you're not one of them. And if you are, you know you are. So most likely you can break free from this. This is only some of the few testimonies that I've received. And it gets me excited every single time that I receive them. There is freedom in Christ, and there is freedom in his foods. Jesus said that my yoke is easy and my burden is light. And come to me, all who are weary, and I will give you rest. I want you to hear me once again. Can you not have bread? Seriously consider that you most likely can, but it needs to be the real bread, which you can do. Have you ever actually thought about it? Right now, are you having a knee-jerk reaction that I'm just crazy and full of it? Have you truly thought about this? Have you seen the evidence? Do you even understand the difference between a real whole grain bread, mill where you mill it yourself at home? You have all the nutrients that God put in that for you. And then the flour that you buy from the store or anywhere really. If you know this to be true, then why do you keep rejecting God's ways? Is it not convenient? Is it because you're sick and unhealthy? Because possibly these foods, the real foods, can possibly bring you healing. Do not choose bondage. Be free. Choose God's ways because his ways are life and everything. If you have a testimony about this real bread that God has given us, please share below so everyone can hear and witness how amazing and awesome our God is. Until next week, bye.